All right, welcome back, Anthony, to the Latter-day Lobster podcast. All right, man, it's been a while, man.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, you're looking good, man. You look like you're a little thinner than the last I saw you. So
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. I don't know. I feel like well, we've been trying to eat healthier here, actually.
that's good.
That's actually probably maybe part of it. I don't know.
That's good. It's good. It's a good way to start the new year. I have to
Yeah.
shave my beard because I start at BYU tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then yeah, yeah. I don't know what I have to do to get that. Like, rub my razor on something gross. Shave with it.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I was telling you earlier. I guess the director of the honor code of the office
Yeah.
of the honor code is in my ward. So I just found that out today at church. He's really nice,
Nice.
and he said that I have nothing to worry about. So that is until Desnat starts reporting me to the honor code. So
That's cool though.
yeah. All right, man. So this episode, we're going to be talking about the gospel topic essays. So I know this was a topic that was kind of interesting to you, Anthony. So tell me kind of like what kind of piqued your interest? Why do you want to bring this up on the podcast?
Yeah, so as I've been going through my own kind of faith transition and whatnot, I've just been kind of like active in different not really specific communities, but specifically, I went to the place that I used to think I would never go to, which was ex-Mormon Reddit. And I
Dude, that
found
place is wild.
as much as like a lot of stuff, but I feel like most people there are pretty like genuine and like not like bad people. Like, they kind of paint like, oh, they're just all bitter and angry. I'm like, they definitely have snark, and there's definitely like a lot of that. But a lot of people like are really willing to like, explain like what they're coming from, and they don't. It's not like they hate Mormons. They hate, like I don't know. It's definitely interesting to see it.
Well, yeah, it's I think kind of when you like try to put yourself in like someone else's shoes and then you reread kind of what's going on. I think someone who's like totally like never considered the other side might find their stuff off-putting, but like I think it's just natural, like a natural response to I don't know. I mean, a crisis of faith is never hard or easy or fun, so it's not like these people are having a good time of it. It's like
Right.
serious wrestling with issues.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of them are. But anyways, so I don't remember where exactly, but just in probably one of the comments or somebody sharing something. I think it might have been like one. I was trying to find it, but I couldn't pull it up. Where like their son had left, and then they eventually kind of left, and they were like more boomer age or kind of towards that, talking about it and how they looked into the gospel topics essays. I might not remember everything, but basically the gospel topics essays, which were really put out, I think, to try and help like give more light on kind of controversial topics in church history. I think they were really meant to help people, to kind of like inculcate or inoculate even like the rising generation, especially from like coming across it and having people that are maybe not agreeing with the church, antagonistic, however you want to view it, kind of telling that narrative. Now the church could kind of share what they wanted to share with it.
Yeah.
It's interesting because a lot of these people who, some of them I've even heard where like they were fully believing, like, they never doubted. They thought, oh, I'm not going to read the anti-Mormon stuff, or I'm not going to, that's not going to like challenge my faith. I'm just going to look at it. And they were really reading, the gospel topic essays, which are on the church's website. And they found out these things that they just never had even known about. And so they got curious and they looked more into the footnotes and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
Just part of their kind of deconstruction. So
Yeah.
I just thought it was how the church is putting these things out to try and help people to avoid that from happening, and yet it seems to be helping them. And so I don't know. I think it'd be interesting to talk about like what the church can kind of do to maybe like frame it, because you can put out essays, but clearly that doesn't seem alone to be able to like help people. So then it becomes a question of well, why are people, because some people might read the gospel topics essays and be like, oh yeah, like this helps me. And other people are like,
yeah,
actually this causes more questions and then they have more doubts. And so maybe just even like, think, how do we deal with, information that's like new or uncomfortable for us, right? And how, what kind of is determining somebody deconstructing because of that, or people who kind of like just, find a different paradigm that helps them to stay within the church, I guess. And so I don't know, I thought that'd be interesting.
No, yeah, that is really interesting. Yeah, I think that in particular, like processing information, is definitely a psychological topic. And it just reminds you of like Piaget with like assimilation versus accommodation, where like when you're confronted with new info, you have to either like accommodate it into like you accommodate it into like its category, or you assimilate it into like your worldview, and it kind of like becomes it expands your worldview. So I don't know. I mean, I've read the gospel topic essays, and there are things that where I definitely have learned things. I remember I think they had a gospel topic essay. Maybe I'm getting this confused with something else. But then they come out with there was a year when they like published the high res pictures of Joseph's seer stone, And like I remember learning about the seer stone on my mission, and I remember learning about them like from a secondhand source that someone had said that Joseph Smith used this seer stone. So I'm like, well, I don't know if he actually did because it's from a secondhand source. But then the church came out with it, and I was like, oh, well, there it is. It's like right there. There is the proof that he used it. And then that changed my perspective on like how the Book of Mormon was translated. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. Same here. I actually was amenable to that information. Like it didn't really bother me. I'm like, oh yeah, like I kind of related it back to Urim Thummim and like how God uses objects and different people divine. And so I actually just pulled up the gospel topics essays and just kind of looking at some of the contents they have, Are Mormons Christian, Becoming Like God, Book of Mormon and DNA Studies, Book of Mormon Translation, First Vision Accounts. Joseph Smith teaches about marriage, priesthood, temple, woman, mother in heaven, peace and violence among 19th century Latter-day Saints. I hadn't.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
And they have a plural marriage section, actually, a specific section just for plural marriage, and then multiple kind of subsections underneath that. So I thought that was
interesting.
And then race in the priesthood. And I think another big one for a lot of people is, translation and historicity of the Book of Abraham.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's interesting because, like we talk about how the CES letter is kind of just like a throw all, like, here's all the stuff and how that can overwhelm people. I think it's interesting that in a similar way, maybe like the gospel topic says, like it has all these different things. And while it's going to put it in a faithful perspective, right, that could also maybe be overwhelming to people because like,
Well, it's really interesting because I was talking to a guy, I don't know who he was. He's on Twitter and he was a sock account. And one of the things that he brought up was, he said something like, well, I grew up in the church and I didn't know that, I didn't know until recently that, Joseph Smith had used a hat and a stone or whatever to translate. And I'm thinking like, I mean, there's probably like a good chance that you didn't know that.
Right.
And with the internet, because like our generation, it's like our parents didn't really have the internet until they were like having us and we were like 10, 11, And so
it was really part of our church curriculum growing up, because it wasn't a big known issue or whatever, I guess. So
right. And so like I think the church, put out too little and too little too late basically.
Some people
and I think it can be like a little disconcerting when you're 30 years old and now you're discovering that the way that you thought the Book of Mormon was translated wasn't actually translated that way. So it's hard to. Okay, so here's the thing that I appreciate about the gospel topic essays, and then I'm going to tell you what I don't like about them. So here's one way to put it. This is something that Jordan Peterson talks about, is like the way that we conceptualize belief or information in our minds is kind of like desktop icons. And so like you have an icon on your desktop and like the icon represents the thing, but it's a low resolution version of the thing. It only gives you enough info for you to recognize that that's the thing so that you know where to click. And then when you click on it, it has much more information that sort of like opens up to you. So we have like these desktop icons that are in, I guess, the forefront of our mind. But then once you like get into it, there's a lot of missing information and you need a lot more pixels to complete the image. So I do like about the gospel essay topics that they do give you all that info, which is, it can be good. Like it's good because the church, I think, is being a bit more transparent, not completely transparent, I don't think, but more transparent than it used to. I think the church is recognizing that there's a need for that among, within the fold to have that info. But so what don't I like about the gospel essay topics is that the thing that I don't like about it, and it's hard. It's not like this is an easy thing to resolve. It's like you have the info itself, but then the reader might not have, I would say, like the philosophical or theological like background to interpret that info like in a way that will necessarily be faith promoting, because
Right.
it like, because every reader brings their assumptions to the table when they start reading this text, when they start engaging with the text, so, and with the essays, and so like, for example, with the Book of Abraham translations, the church in that essay talks about sort of like a catalyst theory, where,
yeah.
right, where like something is sort of catalyzing Joseph Smith to produce works, and from what my studies, delving into altered states of consciousness and psychedelic experiences, it's like there's a documented like empirical body of research that points to the fact that like people can produce these types of experiences using different practices or psychotechnologies. And Joseph Smith's sort of background seems to like dovetail in like with that research, but the average person might not know about that. So
right, a lot of people don't have the same like connections to different things, and I even think like people are different kind of stages of their faith, even, or like kind of maturity levels and how they think. Like like as we grow, like we go kind of from black and white thinking to be able to like understand more nuance, and depending on where you're at, and depending on your parents and your culturation and your kind of just like how you've been taught to think and grow up and all that, I think you might not be able to like look at things, because it's interesting, because like I looked through like a lot of the things that maybe CES or even like some of these gospel topics, that's just things brought up when I was a teenager, investigating the church, and it didn't bother me. Like I was going to Fair and all these other sites, and I felt like the faithful like presented answers were good enough for me, and so I always thought, oh, well, it doesn't bother me, like I've looked at it. But then like going back, it's interesting how with a different frame of mind where I'm actually considering maybe the church is wrong, maybe it's got some things that it's not fully owning up to. Now my view of these things is definitely different. Like I definitely interpret the things, and so there's something to say like I could see the same information twice, like about Book of Mormon historicity or whatever, and at first I was like, oh yeah, like this chiasmus, like all this other stuff, and now I look and I'm like, oh yeah, what about the kind of weird biblical translation things and just different aspects. And so it's interesting how that's changed for me over time, and so I just wonder about that too. Not that I'm like, oh, I'm more enlightened now. That's not the case. I think I'm just I'm taking a different look, and I'm in a different position, I guess, of where I'm looking at it from, maybe more critical and open to the fact that it's kind of like, and biased. I would say I'm definitely biased. I'm definitely biased in the sense of kind of being more critical of like, where can I find the issues, versus where I used to be like, well, maybe I'll shut this out because I don't really like know a lot about that. But I feel like these answers are good.
Well, I think it's a mark of a genuinely curious person and an intellectually honest person to say, there are problems with my belief system, and my testimony or system of belief isn't bulletproof. Like there are parts where there's definitely room for doubt. And I don't think there's necessarily a problem with that. And maybe that's an aspect of it. It's like when people approach these texts, these essays, do they expect that all of their answers will be answered? And it's like, well, no, that's an impossibility. You can't. There's always going to be more questions.
And it's easy to kind of appeal to like different authorities, or like who we see as an authority. So maybe some person's like, oh well, John G or whatever his name was, like he's in this field, whatever he says, like I'm just going to take his gospel. Someone else might be like, well, Brent Metcalf, I'm going to take what he says as gospel. But yeah, I've found like like I have to kind of do my own digging and like do my own research and look at the different sides and then make a decision myself. Whereas before, I think maybe I just relied a little bit too much on, oh, well, this person, probably knows more about that than I do. And I'm not saying that, you can't have the realm of expertise. Because like I know I'm not an expert on these things, but I'm still wanting to do my own, searching so I can make an informed decision, as well. And so I wonder how many people are, having the tools or the time even to do that. I mean,
I don't know.
one
It's
thing I
hard.
think was in my position is, with the birth of the twins and stuff like that, I had a lot more time to just kind of be at home
Okay.
and start thinking more about things. And when you're so busy, you don't really have, most members probably don't even have the time to like go through these things and like, research it. I mean, maybe they
Yeah.
could set aside the time on their hierarchy of like, what's valuable, like what the priorities are. Understandably, it's probably not at the full top of things. They got to worry about family, and all this stuff. And so I think that can play into it too. I think a lot of people during the pandemic, we, at least from what I'm getting from, kind of like ex-Mormon or previous, former Mormon people, is like, like they realized some things while they were like, kind of isolated, not going to like church regularly and stuff like that, or at least, not in person because of the pandemic. And so I think that's interesting too, the time they have to just sit and like actually look into things.
Yeah. No, yeah, that is interesting. Well, I was actually thinking about this lately. So I'm taking Terrell Given's course at BYU,
Nice.
Starting tomorrow, which is exciting. But I'm looking at his syllabus, and like the bulk of the syllabus is actually on Nietzsche's genealogy of morals, which is really interesting. And Nietzsche doesn't put it like he doesn't sugarcoat it. He's like, he like goes after Jesus himself as like a perpetrator of like the moral decay of the West,
Oh,
and so it's like hardcore. Yeah, it's like this is not the text I'd expect an average BYU student to be reading.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. Okay, well, so I think it's great that BYU in the first place offers a course like this. The course is called Exploring Doubt in Literature. So it's it's really cool. I'm super excited. And the reading list is pretty heavy. I'll have to share it with you later. But here's the problem I see. The problem is it's like not everyone is a Terrell Givens. Not everyone has like not as well read, not as articulate, not as like they're not a college professor. Yeah. And like
space.
Yeah, and like I don't want people to confuse just to say like you're too dumb to have a testament. That's not what I'm saying.
It's just maybe they have different things going on, right? Like
it's like, but I think it with so much information out there, it's becoming increasingly more demanding to string so many things together. It's like, so like take the CES letter for example, which I consider like it's like playing softball. It's like not the most rigorous, but even still like. Yeah, but even with that document, like
affecting a lot of people, like a lot of people that I'm seeing in the expo community.
Yes.
Like, yep, CS letter. And I'm just thinking like, this must be the generation that just didn't have a lot of access to info. And now they got all these things. And maybe they look into a few of them. And I still think it's kind of like a kind of vomiting everything, I'm not saying like he didn't have intentions in it, but for me, it's like, that isn't convincing to me. Like deep analysis into things like that, I feel like more interesting than just like this laundry list of like, here's all the issues.
Yeah, exactly. But even still, like I think one of the reasons why the CS letter is such an effective tool is because it highlights a lot of fields that people just haven't thought about, like biblical translation, internal geography of the Book of Mormon. It even goes into things like legal documents and legal processes. The phenomenology of spiritual experiences. What else does it go into? I can't remember. I can't remember. But it's like all these different topics. It's like who has to like on their own come to the conclusion that they should think about these things specifically, and then when you're approached with those things, it's like you don't know much about any of those things, and so like the CES letter appears authoritative. But then secondly, the amount of effort that it takes to become familiarized with those topics, it's a lot. And people, like I said, people don't have time to become experts in Egyptology and geography and biblical translation and phenomenology of spiritual experiences and all. And so it's like, it's a lot, And so, yeah, it's a big, I don't know, it's a big problem that we face. And like Google helps, but it also can distract us, because it's like, if you have enough time to read the CS letter, you probably have enough time to like research other things too. Because that's like 120-page document. Like that's a small book. You can read other small books. And so I mean, maybe one way to put it or to frame it is like I mean, of course, it's like the gospel essay topics are a good starting point. It like introduces you to the topics, but I don't think it's an end all be all solution to people's doubts. And
Oh,
I don't think there's a single bullet for that either.
well, I'm just thinking this, that diagram that Peterson shows, like kind of like the known and then like the unknown and then like the things that you don't know. And I think the gospel topics essay is kind of interesting, like maybe you already kind of knew some of the stuff, or maybe it is like, you didn't know, this stuff. And then you get into that and now you're in like the, like, unknown of the unknown, or however I'm probably picturing how you phrase it. But I do think it opens up, this kind of like possibilities, can of worms, like however you kind of see it. I think, like I said, like with the information age, whereas before, the church kind of like, I think had just people focus on like, don't read this stuff, just like focus on like your spiritual practices and all that, that's a great way to do it. Like, but that's just not, I don't think that's really feasible anymore because people are so interconnected on the line and on the internet.
Yeah.
So you have the CES letter just shows you all these things. You have people making these pithy TikToks and they can frame things in a quick way that catches your attention. But is the church doing that? Is the church,
Yeah, the church is always slow.
Whether they need to or not. I'm just saying if they're going to be able to like help people like stay kind of like solid in the faith and like be able to like process these things, I think that they do need something. And I'm not saying that like, quick things are going to actually make it better. I think like, ideally once you get attention, then you go into the deep stuff and you help them connect it back to like their own spiritual practice and how they can frame it. And that takes time and work. But I think a lot of it back to that internet age and where we're just constantly on a wash of information, and people are just like, well, I'm just going to take this, this, and this and say, I've done my homework. I'm out now, or it's, like, I'm even like forever. I'm going to be doubting myself. Did I make the right decision? It's going to be.
Well, you can't know. Yeah. Oh, okay. So there's a few things there. So it's like, as far as I can tell, there seems to be two categories of people who started to question the church. And one, of course, we've already addressed is the people who just like didn't know these things, but now know them and now they're doubting. And I think these people also fall into the category of like, their parents told them, don't read that. That's anti-Mormon lies. And it turned out to be true. And so, right.
Just framed in a certain way. Yeah.
But I mean, your background is different because, you kind of grew up as a teenager looking into these things and then you were convinced and then became baptized. But now like the path that you're on has taken you to the crossroads. That wasn't caused by like people suppressing info, your parents suppressing info, but it was more like it's more like and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like it's like a difference in values now and meaning. And so
I'm still here, sorry.
Oh, okay, no problem. And so okay, so here's the thing I have to say about like the social media and the TikToks and stuff. It's like people who are generally intellectually curious, they tend to be more open.
Yeah.
Their personality types are more open. And so they're like at the cutting edge faster than like conservatives and people who are like more traditional because they're like sort of safe in the middle of what they know. And they don't venture out into what they don't know. They get there, but much more slowly. And so these people, like John Dehlin, for example, like he had started a podcast, his Mormon Stories podcast, like I think before anyone had a podcast, even before the church had a podcast. And so these people on TikTok, like I hate TikTok. I think it's a waste of time. But I'm also like I'm almost 30 and I'm not like a young teenager. And like right. And so like these kids who are like hungry for information and people who are more open, they're like flocking to like the edge. And that's TikTok right now. And there's other social media platforms where it's like it's like becoming the edge. And the church is so slow, man. Like I was working on this is almost ironic. I was working with the communications department at BYU on a social media like campaign type thing, incentive type thing, where we were trying to mobilize members to use social media in a certain way. And it was a very like top down type thing where, we had gotten it to the point where it could become, it wasn't even a pilot program. Like it wasn't even a pilot program. It was something else. But we would meet at BYU and with students and local leaders and sort of like kind of brainstorm about what to do about this. And then, our goal was to hopefully that it would become a pilot program. And then if it was successful, then it would be like adopted by the church. And that's how like the young men's program started. It was like this bottom up thing that was widely, successful.
Yeah.
And like I said, like if there's an idea that like survives all these like rungs on the church, and hoops, then it's a really good idea. But like, anyways, we were doing our thing, and then COVID sort of happened, and like we had shifted to a different idea. So it was short lived, and like as far as I can tell, it was kind of working. But then like DesNet happened. And so it was like that was like the opposite of what we wanted. And we're like, what the? And so, yeah, so it was like, anyway, so yeah, I don't know, like the church is never going to be able to keep up with like the cutting edge of whatever people are doing.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, I can't say whether or not they will be able to, but I do think there's that tension, right? Because of like that tension between like the top down and then the kind of like bottom up, kind of like things. And I feel like as Latter-day Saints, like, people are great at like mobilizing from the bottom up, like at the, I don't want to say the low level, like the ward level, right? Like great things have been, we're known for service in that way. At the same time, I think, one would have everything has to go through like that kind of like, red tape, so to speak. It is a struggle. I think for a long time, it's kind of been that way. And, I think President Nelson is really trying to make it that it's more kind of like by the spear, like, kind of more like loose and kind of like allowed people to kind of like make decisions more at the local level. But it's something there's that tension. And I'm not necessarily saying like, oh, well, they're, like a gerontocracy, they're like older, really a lot older, so they just don't the same way. But I'm like, but I also know that they're like being informed of, the things that are going on, even if they're not necessarily having all the time to look into it themselves. Like they have meetings where they get to like hear about different, current events and stuff. And maybe some of those attitudes are just like, well, we don't need to worry about this, we just need to worry about that. And it'd be interesting to see, as younger leadership gets in, or younger generations get into the leadership of the church, it's going to be a little while. But
is that it's hard to say what's going to happen
by that time? Like what's going to be different then? And so
yeah, exactly.
A way to kind of bridge that gap. I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's really hard. It's hard to say.
It's not these guys are aware of the different issues because they are, but then like what's kind of going on with not going that route. So I don't know. Maybe the church can do something, or maybe doesn't need to necessarily follow the same things. I don't know, but something's
I don't know
where people are struggling in their lead. So
okay, so here's something that I don't know how many people know about this, but I know some people who are close to John DeLynn, and at one point when John DeLynn, this is before he was excommunicated, but his podcast was popular, and he was doubting and stuff like that. And Elder Holland had arranged, a meeting with him where they could like openly discuss sort of his thing, his issues, and so John DeLynn got that time with him, one-on-one. And this is Elder Holland. He's like the most, as far as I can tell, like the most articulate I possibly have right now. Yeah. And he's a smart guy, and he's not, a blind believer. But for whatever reason, okay, I have to give this story some more info. Okay, so let me unpack this a little bit because I want to make a point here. Yeah. So I know a family member of John DeLynn who served in my mission. I'm good friends with her still. And after her mission, we had a terrible mission president, so that was like already kind of putting us off, on not good ground as far as our testimony for after our missions. But we were able to like push through it and stuff like that. And her family members, most of them, have left the church. Smart people, brilliant people, including John. And she was working at a Marriott hotel, I think in Rexburg. And what had happened was, she was praying like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know if I should stay in the church or something like that. And then she used to work at the front desk at the Marriott. And then when she was there, a gentleman approached her and just started like, he had a small question and then started having some small talk with her. and it turned out to be like the director of Fair Mormon at the time. And so, and she had prayed, like, what am I going to do? And then he sort of like appeared, and like, they got to talking about her doubts, and and he was able to resolve for her, some of her questions and stuff like that. Okay. And this girl isn't dumb. She's like smart. She's college educated, her husband's smart, all her family members smart. And so like she felt, excuse me, she felt satisfaction in like the answers that were given to her. And she thought that was like an answer from God. Elder Holland goes and he speaks with John Dehlin, and for whatever reason, John Dehlin does not find Jeffrey Holland's answers sufficiently satisfactory, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like like the question is like, why was this experience satisfactory for this girl but not for John Dehlin? And that's impossible to answer. And I hope people don't just say, well, because John is so much smarter, but it's like he's not that smart. Like he's pretty like we're not all that far apart, I'd say.
Yeah.
And sorry, I interrupted you. What were you gonna say?
Oh no, I just think, because I've seen things where like people say like, well, I prayed and I felt like this confirmed my testimony that I need to say in the church. But I've also seen people, and I believe they're just as genuine and sincere, said like, well, I prayed and I felt like this way. And so it's, for me anyways, I've had to like kind of like re-examine like kind of my beliefs about like absolute truth, the one true church, like the one true path, like is it possible that God needs this person to stay here and needs this person to go here, and it's just all part of a bigger plan? So that's something that I'm, trying to be more open to, because I think it helps to resolve that. Because I'm like, some people will just be like, well, it's just clear that this is a bunch of mumbo jumbo. I'm going to be, agnostic or an atheist. That just doesn't resonate for me. That doesn't work for me. And so, I think there's a different way to frame it, and so, it kind of goes back to that. I feel like recently I've been feeling more of what Jordan Peterson says when he says, I act as if God exists, what I find true and resonates for me, what I find in the example of Jesus Christ, I want to try, I know I'm definitely not there yet, but I want to try more and more to live that and to act as if God exists and kind of be okay with not knowing, or having such certainty as I felt like I once did. And so, maybe that's like a whole other tangent, but so I think, trying to reconcile those things sometimes it's like, well.
Okay. So something interesting about me, I'm almost 30, I'm 29. And, people say that when you get older, you become more conservative. I don't know how old you have to be before you become more conservative. Yeah, well, it's like I become more liberal,
Yeah, the old ones I've seen have been like, no, that's not happening. And I'm in my
yeah. Well, I become more liberal since the older. You could say I'm more educated now, so I'm more liberal as well. Because the more, I don't know. I don't know what the data is on that, but I know there are smart conservatives and liberals. But I would say I'm more open-minded about a lot of things than I used to be. I love your shirt, by the way. I didn't even see it till now.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool. But it's like, when I was 14, I thought, we are the true church, the one true church, all truth is circumscribed within this church. And now I'm like, no, like there's so much truth all sorts of places, and and like, right, exactly. And like, and I take the line in DNC seriously to search, words of wisdom out of great books, and like, and like, and I think Terrell takes that seriously because he's having us read like the, very anti-religious texts, which is cool.
He understands like we need to, help people to like see these perspectives and be able to see it in a way that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to like, leave the faith or whatever, or religious faith. So,
right. Yeah. And so it's like, I'm trying to remember what you said earlier, but it's like, we have to, for me, it's, again, it goes back to the accommodation simulation thing. It's like, you have to balance those two. And like, how can you expand your frame? I think the church, it has its foot in order, and it has another foot in like the unknown, because it has problems. that are just like inherent to it being a church. Birth rates are birth rates are a problem, I think, for the church. I think an article came out recently that church membership was declining.
Like Utah's like where they get most of their membership from, So
Well, I don't know if
the
church
US.
membership was declining or if like baptisms were declining. I think it was like baptisms are declining because people aren't having as many kids to baptize at 8. And so that's that's a unique problem that like isn't anyone's fault. And so what do you do about that? And then young single adults are now the largest age group in the church. That changes a lot of things because our church is, we're
because we're so family centered, right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
And so I see a lot more, articles now about like, if you're single in this, or how to help a loved one who's like, doubting, or here's a mixed faith marriage. I was surprised to see that, but I thought that was pretty cool. Like, this is how they navigate it or whatever. And so I feel like, okay, the writing's on the wall. Like, we need to start like doing something to like make the shift, because so much of that kind of like old guard is still like, not really as sensitive or understanding of it. Because they're like, well, we just got married and whatever. Like, but you also lived in an economy where you could get, a house working like one job or whatever. Different now for these people, and they're not getting married as quickly, and so it's just a lot. Or they're joining, and they come from broken homes or whatever, and so it just
so there's just unique problems. So okay, so one of those unique problems, of course, is like the information age, something that's unprecedented in world history. The church did something really interesting in the 1920s, I think. If I can remember my history right. It's like in the early 20th century, at university, people were starting to take a really critical approach of biblical texts, and sort of like parsing through the text, and they were starting to discover, like the different voices of the redactor editing the scriptures, and was this book really written by Isaiah? Because it sounds like it was written by 3 people. And things like that, and like this high criticism of scripture, which like they tried to like connect it to like objective reality, time and place type of thing, which it can be helpful. The church, on the other hand, like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, did not do that. They said, we're not doing that. Let the university do that. We're going to keep doing the thing we're doing. And during that time, the church grew exponentially, like it grew big time. But now sort of that higher criticism is finally catching up to it, or to the church. And now people are examining the scriptures and saying, did this actually happen in time and place? Because I'm reading the scriptures. Yeah, and right. And same with the Book of Mormon. So because you can analyze it, and and right, there's the King James translation issues, the Isaiah issues. And so the church, I think that I don't know. I don't know if, I mean, obviously the church did this intentionally, to sort of like ignore that problem in the early 20th century. And as far as I can tell, it was a good move because their membership rose while the other churches were declining, and it really made the church expand. But now I guess, we're paying that back in interest.
Back to bite.
Yeah. And so it's like, it's a different problem. And it's now a different world. So, okay. So here's where I think the church, I don't know. I don't want to say the church. I don't want to be critical of the church because I feel like it's unfair, but I think this is where like apologists sort of miss the forest for the trees. And I've talked to you about this before. It's like, like when John Dehlin sort of came out, he's kind of like a new atheist type of guy.
Yeah. And so the apology was like a response to that, I feel like.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I think they sort of like missed the forest for the trees, where it was a reactive type of thing where they're trying to respond to every like criticism and doubt, and what they're ignoring is like they're ignoring like the meaningfulness of like the gospel message, and like why the Book of Mormon is like key to like for Mormons, if you're gonna be a Mormon, like meaning in life is like inextricably tied to your testimony in the Book of Mormon and the restored gospel and the gospel that Jesus taught, and those principles. And what I see in the ex-Mormon community is like once you abandon Mormonism, a lot of people, yeah, they go to like the political left or to like a sort of woke ideology to navigate, life and why, and I think I don't know. It's like on the one hand, I see people who are like they're very the level of scrutiny that they apply to the church isn't applied to their next set of assumptions.
Yeah, that's a fair criticism, I think.
Yeah. So I think so. It's like so the missing piece, as far as I can tell, in apologetics or in faith promoting information is you can present the scientific evidence and facts and the historical record, but then you have to also tie it into like that meaning making sort of thing that we do, because the facts by themselves are kind of boring and cold. But
people say the facts don't care about your feelings. I'm like, well,
right.
Facts together though, like, facts kind of do care about your feelings. They affect your feelings, and feelings do care about your facts, So I don't know. I'm like, kind of an interesting way to look at it. Like, and we know, like, in our brains too, at least through Damasio's book, Descartes' Error, he says, the emotion, like the reasoning part of your brain is tied into the emotional part of your brain. Like, you don't just, cold logical decisions. That's not how we work. It's not how our brain seems to work.
I think Ben Shapiro made a huge cultural mistake by pointing the facts don't care about your feeling. Like, everyone knows that's wrong.
Yeah, but it's not a very when you really
Well, okay, but that's what I love about Jordan Peterson's work is like, because he talks about knowledge and belief and like what you know and what you don't know, and he says there are emotional components to this. When what you know, it's like he says as far as psychological regulation and stability goes, it almost doesn't matter what you believe. What really matters is like what you believe and the match in your behavior with others. And so, like, if we're both talking to each other and we both approach each other as if we're children of God and that we are divine individuals with, sovereign individuals who have, divine heritage and free will, and, we're each worthy of each other's time and thought, then we're going to get along right. And like the differences we have in articulated belief is almost like on the side. It's not as important. It's important, but not as important. But our match and our comportment is like what's allowing us to have this productive conversation. And so, I think what's happening, especially with, so let's bring it back to the gospel topic essays, right?
Yeah.
You go to Sunday school, you're taught certain things like basic truths about how the Book of Mormon was translated, about, the claims of the Book of Mormon. And like I said, there are these low resolution icons that allow you to move in the world in a way that sort of matches everyone else's behavior. But then once you get the more detailed picture, that informs your behavior. And so like, how do you act now? Like, let's take tattoos, for example. Gordon B. Hinckley was not a fan of tattoos. There's technically nothing wrong with them, but a generation of church members have a certain way of approaching tattoos, and it doesn't match a younger generation's way. And so like so I think people are also making valuations of the church. Like, I don't like the church's values because of how they approach, let's say, tattoos. And that sounds like what's the word? Trivial, but it's not. It's like it because like the church and your belief, it like dictates like everything you do about life. So anyway, so with all this new information, it changes the like how do you act now that you have this new information? And I'm now noticing that how I act is no longer matching how people, like how I was acting before, and it doesn't match how people are acting around me. And like, for example, I was talking to my bishop, and he was talking about Mormon Doctrine by Bruce R. McConkie,
Mhm.
and he was quoting from it, and I'm like, okay, like you are aware that that book has literally 1,000 mistakes, right? And he was kind of like flustered. He's like, ah, and I was kind of upset too, because it's like our behavior isn't matched,
Yeah.
so that's a big part of I think approaching this information. It's like you're gonna the information is gonna change you, and you have to be, I think, in a certain aspect, you have to be like patient with yourself, and you have to be patient with those around you, because now like your behavior is gonna change,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
So
I think it really touches on like just like all of what you just said, like that thing about meaning, right? It's no longer just about like the information that you give, because people can always be making, arguments this way or that way. But it's really about like, what is going to be meaningful for people. People are looking for that meaning. They're looking for that. How is it going to make me feel? How is it going to affect my life? Um, whether like, for instance, Book of Abraham, I'm kind of struggling with some things there because I'm like, okay, well, it seems like, these things that they claimed actually were incorrect, or maybe, Joseph's reading of, the facsimiles is incorrect. There's, things that go into there. But more like important than that is like, but there's still things in the Book of Abraham or in the Book of Moses that I find spiritually and personally meaningful. So it's like, how do I then reconcile the fact that it seems like some of this is just like Joseph got it wrong and it was just like crap. But then there's also things that I find really beautiful in there. And so I'm like, what does that mean about Joseph? What does that mean about, my spiritual walk, whatever? And so I've been having to kind of navigate that. But for me, it really is more not so much about the information, but like, how does this like affect like where I find and derive meaning from, and can I find meaning in something
yeah.
that isn't necessarily completely like historically factual? So, in the Bible, for instance, like this, the way they
Mhm.
thought and the way they did histories back then, like is not the same as like kind of history story that we worry about today. Like it's
Right. Yeah.
different.
Totally different.
They
Yeah.
about like the hard cold facts, that they were more about like trying to tell a certain story. And so it's like,
Well, here's
whether
something interesting.
Jonah and the whale is a parable or not, like
Hmm.
I can still get meaning out of it, right? And so like,
Yeah.
it's like, well, what do you take literally, what do you take not? I'm like, well, in the end, what does it matter? What really matters is like, how does it affect my daily life and walk and my relationship to God, right? So like with orthodoxy versus like, for instance, the sense of like in your beliefs versus
Right. Yeah. Orthopraxy.
practice. And I
Right.
think the church, if it is going to continue to like really thrive and survive, needs to kind of, I don't know if it needs to, but like that switch more to like, let's focus on orthopraxy and like how we practice things. Because when I go into Community of Christ, like there's such a wide range of beliefs. There's people who believe in the Book of Mormon. There's people who don't believe in it at all. There's people who would use it, in sermons or not. There's people who, I've talked about how when they first went there, they're like, well, I don't know if I believe in God. And, they could say that and they were scared to say it coming from, the LDS church. And so, most people would be like, well, oh gosh, what do we do with that? Whereas there, people were just like, oh, that's interesting. Like, tell us more about that. There's not that sense of like fear because it's just more open. It's not like a set in stone, like, oh, like, this makes you
Right.
the group, this makes you, not to say that there isn't like, some of that
Sure.
in Community Christ. I think there is too, like a lot of the people there are more liberal, a lot of people there are more, um, this and that. But I think being able to like have that space for people to be able to be vulnerable, be open, and I've felt this even when I was in the church, is like, it's so critical. Like that's when I had like the most spiritual experience when people could just like open up and be vulnerable to their lives. But we kind of have this like keeping up with this Joneses mentality. Like, when it happens, it can happen, I guess, in a lot of, this is not just in the LDS church or whatever, but cultivating that space where you can question and not just be seen as like, oh, he's a doubter, he's a heretic, he's going to go apostate. It's really important, and helping people to find more like the meaning of it. Even the way that Nelson recently talked about the Mormon is like, it's not meant to be like a history book. Even though like some people would be like, well, it is like
Right. Yeah.
historical for more. Not that he was saying it wasn't. He was just saying, like, it's the real
Mhm.
purpose is this. I feel like Nelson is, and people that kind of come after him, like
Yeah.
starting to get more of like we like kind of like frame it so people aren't just like getting so literalist that they're basically going the Desnet route and thinking like, Brigham Young did nothing or whatever,
Yeah.
because
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
things wrong. Even their apostles agreed.
Yeah.
Got some things wrong. Adam God. Anyways,
Anyways, okay. Here's
yes, I
something.
think meaning,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
meaning making is very important. No, you're good. That's kind of just my point. Like what you were just saying, like the shift to like, let's not so much worry about like, is this, like completely accurate or not, but like, what does it bring for meaning in your life? And like helping people to like start having that transition to maybe a more nuanced, I kind of hate that word, but like nuanced, like view
Yeah.
things as like this black and white thinking, I think is going to be the
Mhm.
way to go. Cause that's what I'm kind of like finding that the Community of Christ, I feel like does so well. And then maybe the LDS church, could learn from their kind of like, little sister
Yeah.
there. Is that
Yeah.
the sense of like questioning and openness and community focus. It's not as insular as I feel like,
Mhm.
it was for me, being in like an LDS ward or whatever, where it's just kind of like, you don't bring those
Yeah.
things up, or only if
Right.
you feel like really cool. And even then you don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everybody else would love to be that more vulnerable, but everybody just kind of like, nope, can't be showing any like cracks in the faith, So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's no, that's really hard. Yeah, I don't know. It's hmm, there. Yeah, there is a lack of space. I think. I don't know if it's. I feel like one, we are like the world is becoming more and more like progressively more tolerant. I see that in the church too, kind of like what you were saying with President Nelson, kind of what he's talking about with about the Book of Mormon isn't like a historical text. It is sort of, but it's not like a historical text like we would write a historical text.
Right.
So I see the church. Yeah, the church is becoming like it's slowly becoming a more tolerant place. Slowly, definitely more tolerant than a generation ago. Um,
But people are still fissuring and kind of bleeding out,
yeah, it's yeah. I don't know. Like, so one of my biases is for me, it's like an intellectual problem. It's like it's not just an intellectual problem. You can't like talk your way through this, through a meaning crisis or a faith
Right.
crisis
That
because
experience.
that's like half the battle. Um, and so back to the meaning thing. So here's something that I thought was this is one of my least favorite parts about the CS letter. He talks about how he felt the spirit when he watched The Lion King. And there's a scene in The Lion King where like where like Simba sees Mufasa and like he says remember, and it's like beautiful, and it's a deeply meaningful part of the story.
See, that
And
couldn't be the spirit. Go on, but I have a thing.
yeah. And so in the CS letter, he writes something like, well, I felt the spirit while I watched The Lion King. Does that mean that Mufasa and Simba actually happened in time and space? I'm like, dude, why are you like talking like a fifth grader, man? Like, please be more sophisticated about this. And so I was like, I remember like I was just so frustrated with the CS letter at that point because I was like, this does a disservice to like everyone, like caricaturizing this, but it's like it's that meaning that resonates with you when you watch The Lion King or when you read Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, or great literature. I recently read The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy. Great book, 40 pages. And everyone can read it. Super great.
There's some good stories.
Yeah, and like I remember that it was one of the most touching stories about this guy who is dying and he looks over his life and he notices that like everything he did was sort of a facade and because of peer pressure and he was trying to impress the Joneses and and even to the point where like his marriage was like fake, and he really didn't love his wife. And it's like and like at the end of the story it's almost like he's praying and he's like why am I dying and why am I suffering? And in the story, he hears a voice and it says, "This is just how things are." And like, anyways, like right before he dies, he has a change of heart, and it's like, yeah, thank you, I love him, but it's like you read these stories in the Book of Mormon, like I think a great example is Enos, the story of Enos, one of my favorite stories in the Book of Mormon, where yeah, like he admits that he's just a sinful person and he prays to God and he's like instantly forgiven. And he learns that like that like the power of redemption in that story. It's like that's what the world needs. it doesn't matter if the Nephites existed or didn't exist in time and place. Like the fact that the world needs forgiveness for it to function, like people need forgiveness. There's no scientific argument for why people need forgiveness, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you can maybe, you know, um, do a study about forgiveness in a social science setting, but like none of those studies are replicable. What's the word? Replicatable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like you're still in the dark, but it's like these stories resonate you at a deep level, and it's like we don't know why they do, but they do, and then they like it's like true at a certain level that's not like an objective truth or actually it's like by definition not objective.
Yeah.
But
Objective truth, can it still have value? And I think it
yeah,
does. Something, and yeah, that's kind of just like what you're saying. Like I feel like that's really like the switch for me is like these things have meaning themselves, like regardless of like the historicity or whatever. Like what is it trying to teach us? Like what is the principle behind it? And going back to that whole like spirit thing, like oh well, I just built the spirit. It's like well that was one of the things that kind of like caused a shift in me is when I hadn't really been like doing church at home because it was just a struggle for me, and we hadn't been going to church or whatever, and I just I just spiritually I just felt kind of like not much, anything there. And then when I attended Community Christ, virtually, I just watched over Zoom, saw a congregation, everything just touched me. I don't even know how to describe it. Like I felt the spirit, what I would consider the spirit. And it just felt like, wow, like, this is so like, I needed this. And so then I was like, well, wait, because does that mean now that the church is wrong? But I'm like, I felt the spirit there, and I'm feeling the spirit here. What the heck's going on? And so I think it kind of changed me in a sense of like, like maybe that's where I needed to be for that time period because it was serving me well. And now I'm going to this different, path or whatever that, I feel like God's still like is okay with me being on and he wants me to explore stuff. And maybe I'll come back to the church. I don't know, but I think that just really, really changed me and struck me. And so the whole like, oh, like, I felt the spirit, like, like, yeah, like I felt like in the spirit, watching this, fictional Christmas movie, whatever. But that doesn't mean, I think the thing is with, what he's kind of getting at in the CS letter is like, maybe for him, he was ready to think like, like the spirit testifies as this like black and white, like all or nothing, like, like this is true, that is right. Because like in the Book of Mormon, like, like if the Book of Mormon's true, then this, this, and this. And I think now more and more people question that for me of like, no, I think you need to like know those things individually, right? Like if the Book of Mormon is true, that means that like the Nephites did actually exist, or like maybe it just means that that the of the love of God, or that Jesus is the Christ, or something like that. And so I think he's kind of like presented as this black and white thing of like, oh well, if I feel the spirit, about Mufasa, then that means he existed. No, that's not what the spirit was probably telling you. I feel like it's telling you, hey, like this is like a meaningful story for you to understand of like like I don't know, sacrifice or maybe just like conflating like I don't know, like well sure. It was sad and that was like on a spirit. So for me, like the way I read the spirit in the scriptures stuff like that, it isn't, that's not either how it is, or maybe it's just sorry, I'm over explaining this, but you get the idea, right? Like basically,
well,
with
here's
the spirit,
interesting.
It doesn't have to necessarily be about the history of something. It's about the meaning of the principle behind something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, I exactly right. Yeah. Okay. So here's something interesting. My wife, her sister served in Arkansas, and we went and visited her mission president, he's been home for 5 months now. But he has a really cool story. He did branding for the church. He worked directly under Elder Bednar. Branding is like a big deal. Like the church's brand is super important to the church. The church image is super important to the church. And how our missionaries look. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so he did that for years, and then he became mission president. And he obviously had an insight into like what the church is doing, what it's aiming for. And he said something really interesting to me. He said, when he got to the mission, these are 18-year-old kids, 19-year-old kids. They were doing kind of like weird things. He shared a story where some 70 or someone, I don't know, some video from the 80s, I don't know what, had told him like, if you part your hair to the side,
great.
Yeah, exactly. Like you'll get baptism or something, like something ridiculous, you know. And so all these missionaries were like partying their head to the side.
But anyways,
No, and like sisters would like they would wear their name badge to bed, you know, on their PJs or whatever they were wearing. I know, right? You're like raising an eyebrow. I'm raising an eyebrow. It's like just ridiculous things.
kind of making laws onto them, like adding things that need to be added.
But then this is what he said. So when he was doing branding for the church, you know, the church has, you know, if you don't know this, you should know this, but the church is sending out, you know, surveys to members and former members and people to gather info. First of all, I want to say about that, like, I think people will look at the surveys themselves and say, well, shouldn't the church know this by revelation, what's going on? And it's like, that's really like a really dumb argument because like revelation is action dependent. So like you have all the info and then the revelation helps you organize the info. So
revelation is good information. And, you know, even in my mission, that's how it kind of like taught, like, you know, like you need to do these things in order. So maybe people have this, like, yeah, there's, again, these simplistic views, right, of like different things, and, you know, how, like, oh, like, this is how translation works. This is how revelation works. Is boom, dictated, you know, straight from God, like, and we're starting to say, like, maybe not.
Right, exactly. Okay, so he has family members and a lot of the people that they surveyed, people who have left the church. I actually have a very similar story. I wouldn't say exactly like yours, but similar story where like they felt like they needed to leave the church. They felt that they were doing the right thing leaving the church. They're now in a different church. Usually it's like a non-denominational Christian organization. And they're active, right? And they're active in that church, you know. And so people started to ask, you know, the survey started to ask them. They had what are they called? Focus groups, I think that they're called, where they would, yeah. And so basically the takeaway from all that, you know, all that data was, you know, people are still like Christian and deeply Christian, and they still want to worship God and Jesus, but they felt that the church wasn't giving them like the gospel. And now they're sort of like finding it somewhere else, like at a non-denominational church. And he tied it to like the experience with these elders and sisters who were doing things like parting their hair to the side or putting their plaque, you know, on. Yeah, it's like, well, it's like one, like those beliefs are absurd and false, and also they kind of like get in the way of like the meaning value type of thing. It's like you know, parting your hair to the side is sort of irrelevant, but like the bigger principle is like you should look presentable, you know, or like going to bed with your plaque on. It's not going to guarantee you baptisms, but the principle, something like, you know, yeah, like you're still a Christian or you're still Mormon, even when the lights are out, or, you know, even when
doesn't leave.
Yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, right.
It's like you don't stop being a good Christian when the day's done or something, you know. And so like he says there are a lot of like cultural artifacts that kind of like get in the way, and I see them too here, you know, like I think testimony meeting is like a big example. Like, I know X, Y, and Z. I know that it's objectively true. And those aren't even like the church's fault, you know, like the need for an objective standard of
right in their brains, I guess. Yeah, it's complicated that way. Yeah, I'm not sure to be totally involved, but I get what you're saying though. Yeah, like we kind of like we want certainty, right?
Right. Well, exactly. We want certainty, right? So anyway, so yeah, I think like we're misframing certain things, and like at the end of the day, it's like where people go, you know, they're still going to where like they're still being connected to Christ, you know. And so I one of the things I hate about the discussion, it's like, you know, you have like the Exmos and the you know, the True Blue Mormons. It's like these aren't helpful. like things.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. So
Kind of get like a little like, yeah, culture in its own language. Like even the X-Men community, like obviously like I see that over X-Men Reddit, like TBM,
yeah.
PIMO. I was like, what? It's like,
PMI
oh,
what?
physically and mentally out. Okay, so like I had to like
Oh,
so I'm
right.
like personally, like I would never use X. Like it just doesn't.
Or
It,
what's
like
the other one?
I
The
get like,
TSCC, the so-called church.
oh yeah, the so-called
And
church. I'm like,
yeah,
like I get like for them, they're like, yeah, like I think it's like not. I'm like, okay, but like for me, I'm just like whatever. Like I don't have that kind of. And maybe they're just in a different stage, right? Maybe they're just kind of like still angry about things, and I get that, and I honor that, But
yeah.
for me, it's just like
So,
those things like, it becomes more divisive and doesn't really like
mhm,
help build bridges in that same way, And
right.
so
Well, I
then you get
think,
people saying like, "State, you're this," so it goes both ways. But yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's like there's a mismatch between how we model belief and then like how we're supposed to act and then what the result of that action is. It like um I'm trying to think of a really good example. I don't know, hold on, give me 1 second. It's like the last thing I can think of is like the loaded gun analogy. It's like if there's a gun, you should treat it as if it's loaded. Even if it's not loaded, you should treat it as if it's loaded because that's going to give you like the best possible outcome,
mm,
you know. And that's important because it's like or oh no, here's an even better example. I think when you're driving in a car and you have road rage, you know, like at an intellectual level, you know that there's a human being in that car with a family and they're just trying to get to where they're going. Maybe they're late, whatever, right?
right.
But you're still an a-hole on the road because they like got into your lane. And
Right.
so, yeah. And so it's like, all these things that are happening like at a true objective level, but you still act in like the wrong way.
Right. Kind of at
Um,
the level of emotion in the moment.
yeah. Or at the wrong level of analysis. Cause you don't really see, human mother
Right.
child. You see big hunk of metal and I have a big hunk of metal and the bigger
Yeah.
hunk of metal is going to win. That's what you see. And that's all true, but it's like the meaning and implication of action is like at the wrong level. So we have these beliefs, like oh, here's a good one. Like Moroni was a perfect person, or Nephi is a great honorable person. It's like no, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, it's like these people are deeply flawed, and so when you approach the discussion with another Mormon um, with the new info that you have. It's like some people are at the not the same level of analysis that you're at, and so that creates conflict, and I think it divides us for sure. Um, and so so yeah, so going back to the essays, it's like read the essays. They're going to change you. They're going to change your perspective, and you have to then like be patient with
Listen to
others
the ideas.
to
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And then be understanding. It's like not everyone has read those essays or understands them correctly or whatever. And so,
But
yeah.
yeah, and it's interesting because like I said, like I think I love what you say, being patient with yourself, like letting yourself like take the time to like really think about it before you like make those decisions, right? And just kind of like means like you stay, great. Like, I'll support you in that. If it means you go, I'll support you in that. Like, having this kind of like either or us versus them thing, I think it's just cause more problems. And sometimes I feel like the church is kind of like kind of affirming that narrative. But then other times it seems like they're trying to do the more pastoral thing. Oh, that goes back to apologetics. So like it used to be the more combative apologetics, where I feel like Givens and those people have done is those people. I don't know. I said that, but like
What do
kind
you
of like
mean,
people
those
like
people?
those. They've made it more of a pastoral apologetics. It's more about like kind of like
Okay.
the soul and things like that. And I think overall, if the church can really do that, I think it's going to help a lot of people to find like some meaning and just go more in that direction. That if somebody leaves, like that's okay. We're not going to like hate on them, whatever. Like if they're like being antagonistic towards us, like you have the right to be like, hey, like I just don't appreciate that. Like if you feel that way, whatever, but just don't come after me for it, sort of thing. But and also like if someone else leaves, like don't just like egging on them or whatever. Just if we can just have more space for like being okay with people doing this or that, not seeing it so like either or. I don't know. I feel like it would just help.
Yeah.
I don't know if it really makes sense, but that's kind of like at least been my journey, you know. And so, and I think there's a lot of people in the church, you know, the LDS church that are that way and are thinking that way too, and are, you know, accommodating. Like, you know, I just saw a friend of mine who just kind of recently opened up publicly. You know, I'd already known. He told me about just like about like, you know, how he'd leaving the church or whatever, and you know, a lot of like the people who were members like, you know, like, you know, it's fortunate that, like, you know, sad that you're leaving, but I also like get why you're doing it, and you know, like that kind of like I think community is really going to like help people to feel like, okay, maybe I can stay, maybe I can work things out, not the like, oh well, can't associate with you now, you know, my kids can't play with your kid thing. So I think as we move more away from that, and maybe we'll see that with millennials and Gen Z, nobody's worried about like, oh, they're going to lose their faith or they're going to like go too left or whatever. You know, some people in the more like far, I don't know, conservative right word, like, you know, kind of more approaching the death angle are like, oh, like it has to be like, you know, this way. But I think as things change over time, like maybe we'll see more of that and more openness to that, and maybe it'll help keep things kind of.
So I really like.
They are so yeah.
Yeah, I really like something that Hannah Seriak said. She's great.
Awesome.
I wish she was on Twitter, but I can see why she's not. Anyway, one of the things that she said about, yeah. So one of the things she said on her Facebook was something like, she was talking about specifically about faith crisis. She said something like, you know, maybe we should start thinking about faith crisis as more like a paradigm shift. Because at the end of the day, I think there's two reasons for that, like why we should think about it that way. At the end of the day, it's like, if we're going to like address the needs of people who have left the faith, it's going to require a paradigm shift on the part of the church and the part of the members, not necessarily to like compromise with like doubters, but like just to have a more updated approach on things. But then secondly, you know, when you learn this information, you know, when you read the gospel essay topics, I think the wrong way to approach it is it's not going to like simply confirm what you already know. Like that's just a totally wrong expectation. It's going to give you that paradigm shift. Yeah. And so I think maybe that's what it is. Cause it's like, let's say, for example, you're doubting or you hear about these doubts and let's say even too, your parents told you this was just a bunch of ex-Mormon lies. You read the gospel topic essays and you're not running into like that familiar, comforting, true old story that you were used to. You are now learning about other things that you didn't know about. Right? Yeah, exactly. And then a bunch of things you didn't know. And so it's like, what you should really
everything, you know, and then you kind of like not lose your faith in it, but be like realize like they didn't know everything, you know.
Yeah.
It's a shift for everybody, right?
Yeah. So I think approaching a faith crisis, it's like you're now at that transition where like your paradigm is going to be shifted because it has to necessarily shift. Yeah. You're a maturing person. So maybe I think that's a good way to like approach these essays. It's like, okay, like you know, so one of the things my dad told me when I was reading anti-Mormon literature when I was a teenager, he said, don't be reading that stuff until you've read all the standard works. And like, I didn't listen to him, but I understood what he was getting at. It's like, make sure you know your tradition through and through before you like claim to know it.
And don't ever read that. He's like, you know these things, you know, so you understand what's taught to you and then analyze it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was really wise of him. But I think, you know, like I said, you know, everyone goes through a paradigm shift. You know, the belief you had when you were 8 is not the same as you were a teenager. Definitely not going to be the same when you're 30. And then, you know, not going to be the same when you're 60. So I think that's like the right approach. Yeah. Cool. All right, man. Well, I think we should wrap up soon. But any other thoughts about the essays or anything like that?
No, I just appreciate you having me on and being open to talk. I think it's good to show people like, you know, just because you when like, you know, see things always the same way, that doesn't mean you can't have like a good productive conversation about it if you're just both, you know, assuming I think like the best in each other and you know, just having conversations of good faith I think is really important. And I've been learning that, you know, even though I've struggled, you know, here and there, like I still, as I get to know like the people, you know, I think it helps me to be like, okay, like, you know, like stop just seeing them as like somebody on like a page, like on Twitter or whatever.
Yeah.
Get to know the person, just things a lot. And yeah, just like you said, just kind of reiterate, I think it's being open to those paradigm shifts and like realizing it doesn't have to be either or, maybe you can make it both and, or like, just figuring out like things for yourself. It's worth the wrestle, to kind of borrow what Sherry Do says, but like, wrestling with God, I think, we need to move towards that wrestle, and wherever it takes you is wherever it takes you. But, I believe that, God is big enough and merciful enough and understanding enough to handle all of it. And so I'm trying to, not approach it anymore from this fear, though I still have those things come up, but more from like approach of, faith and love and trust in God that everything's going to work out, and that, I don't see him punishing somebody for doubting or for, questioning or seeking. So I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, but I guess it's all.
Well, no, yeah. No, yeah, man. Thank you so much for coming on, and you always have good things to talk about. So yeah.
Thanks.
All right, man. Well, I hope you have a great New Year's. It's 2022. Hopefully this will be a good year. My friend Christian Dahl was telling us, we're on the third part of the trilogy, so we should have a happy ending soon with this whole COVID stuff. So
Oh yeah.
yeah.
No, I'm feeling good. I think it's going to be a lot of new opportunities and new discoveries with myself and God and others. So I'm excited for it. It'll be good.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.